Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of Les Bons Mots, a podcast about language learning by ACA, a language training school based in Quebec, Canada. I'm so excited to join you again. This podcast is designed for people who are learning languages, and each episode will cover a different topic connected to language learning. Every other week, we'll bring you a mini-sode with different tips and tricks to help you on your language learning journey. We have some exciting surprises planned for the minisodes this season. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Britta Potion Reader. I've been teaching English as a second language for over 10 years, and I'm learning French and Spanish. Language is my passion. This week, I'm joined by my guest host and the president of ACA, Taylor Ireland. ACA was established in 1983, and Taylor has been president since 2009. He's the perfect person to talk to about the business of language learning, an important industry that is often underrepresented in Canada as a whole. Let's get started. Taylor, welcome to Les Bons Mots. It's a pleasure to have you here to talk about the business of language learning.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Britta.
So let's start with how you became involved in language education. How did that happen?
My involvement in language education is kind of I don't know what to say it's a typical story, but really probably started out of a love for or a desire to travel. I had thought of going into education when I was in high school and younger, but was pushed to go to other areas such as, go be a lawyer, go be a doctor, go be a dentist. And I explored those areas before deciding to do a finance degree. And really the plan was to do a law degree. Once I was accepted to law school, I decided I really wanted to travel. So I went to Switzerland where I was an au pair, which is really a nanny, where I stayed with the family. And part of that process and tasks were to provide some language exposure for the family and for the kids, whether it was not necessarily structured teaching, but helping with their English homework, speaking with them. And so that kind of piqued a little bit of the curiosity. And then after traveling, decided I wanted to travel some more. And back in 2003, 2004, it was fairly common and still is common for university students or just after university to go to Asia. So I went to Taiwan in 2004, jumped on a plane, went to southern Taiwan and found a job in a language school.
Fantastic. I think that a lot of teachers, as you mentioned, get their start through combining a love of travel and an opportunity to see some of the world with a profession. How did you become involved with ACA? It's a long ways from Taiwan to Quebec City.
Yeah, it's a long ways from Taiwan. And in Taiwan, I taught in a language school. They're called Bushy Bands, really after-school programs. And I remember starting out my teaching experience with a class of 7 and 8-year-olds and watching the teacher and the teacher asking about third person singular, why do we add S onto he goes and she does? And having no idea why. I couldn't answer the question. All the kids shot their arms up with the answer, well, because, third person singular, he, she, it, and who we add S. And so started out there and really enjoyed it and worked for a wonderful organization called Schoolhouse Language Center, which I still try and kind of follow and bring some of the practices that they had into ACA. After Taiwan, I decided I wanted to travel some more and I really wanted to learn a language. Probably, if I'm being perfectly honest, I wanted to continue to travel and maybe avoid responsibility of getting a job and getting a house and settling down. So I wanted to learn French. So I found a French program at the University of Laval and moved to Quebec, obviously not speaking any French and having some ESL experience. Started to work as an ESL instructor. I worked for a couple of language organizations in Quebec, one of which was ACA. And so started off teaching with ACA in 2005 is when I started at ACA teaching classes, often a schedule of Monday morning, 7:30 to 11:30, go to my French classes and then teach, 4:30 to 9 at night. And did that numerous days and teach Saturdays and jump in your car and drive to another client. So have lived that experience of starting out as an ESL instructor where you're trying to cobble together a schedule that makes sense for you so you can teach enough hours.
So when you were in Taiwan, you mentioned that you were pretty impressed with the school there. And then you came to Quebec, you had some experience with schools here and with ACA and different language programs. What do you think was missing from language schools in 2005?
In Quebec, and again, this is based on my personal experience. It's not to say that all language schools were painted with the same brush, but by and large, my experience with language schools at the time was they were working more like placement agencies in that they were finding a client, finding people who wanted to teach English, and then placing them with the client. And for the most part, the instruction was make sure the client's happy. So you were kind of left to your own devices to find information, find content, develop your own content. And so you never really had a continuity in the learning path of the students because you tended to always start off with, like everyone starts off with, let's start off with some verb tenses, let's start off with subject and verb. And then, the students would have, well, I've already seen this, I've already done this. So it was always a challenge to kind of develop that. You were printing off your own documentation. It didn't always look professional, or you had photocopies that were from 1972 with the font that goes with it, or they would provide material, but the discussion point would be the start of the internet. And, even in 2005, while the internet was in place and people were seeing where it was going to go, so subject matters that were already quite dated. And it was always surprising that I found that most language schools, and again, not all language schools perhaps, but the ones that I had experience with, as much as they were proposing and providing training to organizations, provided little to no training of their own. There was no really professional development. There was no workshops. There was no areas in which English teachers could develop and hone their skills and then also collaborate with other language teachers as well. So most people were really on their own in a lot of ways. So that was one of the things I found to be peculiar. I also was surprised that in a province like Quebec, with such a need for language teaching and language acquisition, that it was challenging to see a career path for people in the private education sector. Whereas when you went to Asia or Europe, those kind of opportunities were aplenty. So that was also one of the things that I thought was peculiar, that it was always about kind of cobbling together. That still remains somewhat true today, but there are more and more opportunities for full-time career type activities and a path where you can see it as an actual profession. I teach ESL. That is my profession rather than that is just my job before I get something else.
Absolutely. And I think as a profession, ESL teaching is evolving. And so it's important that there is some kind of future that allows people to invest in their skills and develop those. I know there's more higher education available now in TESOL, teaching English as a second language, for example, or French language instruction as well. I wanted to go back briefly to what you said a little bit about the materials. You mentioned that you were in a position that many instructors can relate to, of working with a company where you're having to cobble together materials on your own without sort of a clear vision. Is that what prompted you to develop course books for English and French instruction with ACA?
Yeah, that was a big part of it, was just say you have all these individuals and people were creating good content. It's not to say that because it wasn't organized that there weren't teachers providing really good classes, because they were, and they were talented individuals. But when you step back and look at it from an organizational standpoint, it was clear to me that why not help those teachers who are great become even greater, and those who are good become great, and those who are just starting out, how do you get them to being good and great quicker? Well, you do it by collaborating, by sharing, by working together. And so it also became really clear that by bringing people together and coming together to create those course books, well, then you could also create a little bit of organizational knowledge, and that could be passed on. So when people would create good content, you'd have a little bit of that continuity in your organizational knowledge, that it would stay. And then that was a big part of it. It was also a fantastic way to keep people engaged during the slower periods of ESL instruction. It is somewhat a seasonal industry, and that we do kind of follow a school calendar where it's busy from September into late May. But then as you move through your summer months, it does sort of slow down. You also have a period over the holiday season where there can be 3 to 4 weeks where people are less interested in taking classes during the holiday period. So by bringing in those elements, you also created a opportunity to create career paths for people as well, so they could see where they could go. They would be engaged, and that was a big part of it. And the school that I worked with in Taiwan, that was a part of what they did. They had a lot of their own content. And the other element too of that was working with the content that was on the market was usually designed, and it was destined for markets, either European markets or Asian markets or the academic market. And so you didn't really find a lot of course material that was designed to help people with business skill acquisition, or how do I do something? To learn about fork is a fork and this is the kitchen. And those things are not necessarily relevant to a learner early on when they're working with a language. They want to know, how do I present my business? How do I present what I do? How do I give customer service? So we really worked on planning and developing those skills. That was a big part of it as well. And I never thought it was fair to ask our instructors, who are specialists at teaching languages, but was not fair for everyone to become a specialist in finance or law or human resources. People would know about it, but it wasn't necessarily a realistic thing to think that everyone could develop their own content. But if you provide them with the content and the framework within which they could provide a course, they would succeed. And we have seen that.
You make a great point about the fact that our materials are adapted to our context. And as you said, instructors are amazing instructors, but they may not be experts in every field of business in which our students are engaged. Let's talk a little bit about our context in Quebec, in Canada. What do you think are some of the misconceptions that exist in our industry around language learning?
Probably the first one is just bilingual, and what does being bilingual mean? Many people have different definitions of it. A lot of people, that's their goal. I want to be bilingual. And so you're often setting yourself up for disappointment when you set out with that goal. Most people are probably, when they say that, really saying, I want to be functional. I want to be able to perform in my second language. I want to be able to perform in English. And that would be one conception. I think also people have a tendency to really want to lose their accent. And so they really focus on accent reduction, which there are times where accent reduction is important. And we want to make sure we can enunciate and we have clear pronunciation. But your accent is something that allows you to make mistakes. It allows you to try new things because the receiver knows you're speaking a second language, and so is much more forgiving when you do speak to them. And because we do see this sometimes where people have learned at a very young age, they maybe don't have an accent, but they didn't necessarily develop all the linguistic and language skills. And you, as a receiver, when you hear them speak, you tend to see them as a native speaker, yet they don't speak correctly. And so you tend to assume it's from a lack of education, or they're just not, maybe competent in that way. So I think accent reduction is another thing. Probably some of the other conceptions are that many people believe that if you're intermediate at one organization, you will be intermediate everywhere. That's one thing that, if I'm an advanced, I'm advanced. Well, people have different definitions of what that means. So I would say that's one of the other things. And I'd say early on, if we're looking from a human resource perspective, there are people that move to Quebec and have an assumption because they speak English, they're automatically going to be an excellent English teacher. And there are other skill sets that one requires. Not all great hockey players become great coaches. Not all great musicians can necessarily run an orchestra. So there's, different skill sets in terms of being able to produce a language and then being able to teach a language. And then another element I think sometimes is the belief that if you don't have an education degree or a certificate or a master's in linguistics, that you're unable to teach ESL. Some of our best teachers, they come from a training perspective. They do have a love of language, but there's many areas in which one develops the skills that are important or are necessary for teaching. You can come from a corporate training background. You can come from a sales training background. You can come from sometimes even a coaching background. And we also see a lot of people that come from spaces, whether it's the hospitality industry, and being able to relate to a lot of people from different walks of life. That's also a really important element when we're teaching ESL and teaching languages, especially to adults.
Absolutely. You mentioned bilingualism earlier, Taylor, and the fact that many of our students are concerned with becoming bilingual. And this is something that we explored last season, actually. in terms of definitions of bilingualism. ACA is operating within Quebec, but we're also operating across Canada at this point. What do you see in terms of our context? What are businesses concerned about? And I guess what do they need to keep in mind when it comes to language training?
You know what? One of the things I've noticed the most is one of the biggest changes since even, say, 2005 over the last 10, 15 years is how much more language learning has become part of organizational development and part of even their strategy for growth. And so you are seeing organizations take linguistic training much more seriously. And we even see this within the industry itself. We tend to talk about, formation linguistique, so linguistic training rather than just English classes. We would even say that, we're a language training company. We're not just a English school. And so it is about providing that corporate training the same way that we would provide sales training or soft skills training or technical training. Linguistic training at a corporate level has become a much more integral part of organizations' plans and part of their strategy as well as they become much more involved in a global economy. And this isn't necessarily just a result of organizations from outside of Quebec purchasing Quebec companies, but more likely than not, it's the result of Quebec organizations taking a much more active approach outside of Quebec. And so we notice that within organizations where 15 years ago, it was often, say, maybe the C-level people, your VPs, your CEOs, your CFOs, who were required to speak in English, perhaps because they were listed on a stock exchange, or perhaps because in terms of financing or they were dealing with outside clients, they were required to speak. But by and large, maybe more of your frontline staff were able to kind of work every day in French. And it was a nice thing if they could speak English, but it wasn't necessarily part of your business operations. Whereas today we see much more integration within the organizations where, yeah, those C-level people still do need to speak English and speak it well, but now it's basically become throughout the whole organization, from your human resource department to your payroll to your customer service. Everyone needs to be able to have a functional level of English because we're competing within a global marketplace. And so if you're from Quebec, language, issues aside, if you're competing in the US or competing in Europe or in Asia, often that language of business will be English. And so you need to be able to provide support because that's happening. And there'll be competitors who can do so. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed is in terms of a change around that. On a federal level, if we're talking about within the public service and within our crown corporations, I think you're also seeing a big difference with the interest in French and the interest in learning French as a second language as well. And so we do see more people in Ontario and Calgary or Vancouver or even Saskatoon looking to develop their French skills. And we notice this also if you look at the involvement in French immersion across Canada has exploded over the years. So bilingualism, whether it's English French or French Spanish or whatever, globally has become more important. And speaking just one language is going to be probably eventually part of a past era, even within North America. If we look at what's happening throughout North America, language acquisition of a second language, whether it's Mandarin or Spanish or Japanese or English or French, has become much more important. So you're seeing that within even the organizations within Quebec, that language training as a whole has become much more part of their overall business strategy. And the companies that have taken that approach, they have much more of an organizational approach to it. And they're looking at their entire organization and how to increase kind of their whole organizational level of English. They will sometimes still pinpoint individuals who have been fast tracked either for management positions or have key roles that they'll invest more in. But the companies who are doing really well are taking an organizational approach to language learning and putting in year-round language training. They're not just doing it as sporadic. We'll do 30 hours in the fall and we'll come back next year. They'll do it a fall session, winter session, summer session. And they're also asking their employees to take ownership of their language training and their language skill development by investing time, whether it's a little bit of homework. And part of our content development and part of even Les Bons Mots is part of that to provide opportunities for our clients and our participants to practice in any way they can. That's why we have an online learning platform so they can practice. Essentially, we're looking to remove all excuses that one could provide as to why they're not practicing all the time, because that's really important. And that's really been important that the organizations, the ones that are doing well with it, have taken on a multi-level approach and understanding that for different types of learners, you need to provide different types of services. So you need the in-person training, you need some online development, you need course books. You also need some times to kind of explore your own interests. So that's why we've done the podcasts, the news articles, the little videos. So everyone has an opportunity, regardless of your learning style, to practice and to continue to take ownership of their language development. That's probably some of the biggest things that we've really noticed over the last few years.
A lot of what you're saying, Taylor, really resonates with my experience in the classroom. A lot of our students are dealing with colleagues in other parts of Canada. They're dealing with clients in the United States. And we can see that the growth and expansion of Quebec industry is really driving a lot of the interest in language acquisition. And we can also see that federally, there's that interest in bilingualism. I think I mentioned in episode 4 that when I was living in Vancouver, the demand for French immersion was immense, and that French immersion schools were having lotteries because there was far more demand than supply. So this is definitely something that's continuing. 2020 is a year that brought a lot of surprises, not necessarily always the good kind. We're dealing still with the ongoing pandemic. How has this affected our industry and ACA specifically? How have we adapted?
Yeah, well, like everyone, there was a big impact. Before the pandemic, we did have online training. Probably 20-25% of our training was taking place online. But then still the lion's share of our training was taking place in person, where we were going into organizations, into a small room with 5 or 6 individuals, talking for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then moving on to another classroom or another organization. And so obviously that type of activity is probably one of the highest risk activities one could partake in. So we've had to go 100% online with virtual training. Language training, although I would say lends itself quite well to a virtual environment, if you have winning conditions. You do need to maintain a small group size. We've all probably participated in video conference calls. As soon as we start hitting 6, 7, 8 people, it's quite sporadic and it's going to be much more of a webinar style approach rather than an interactive approach. And in language acquisition, it needs to be interactive. You need to participate. Speaking a language is a physical activity. You need to participate physically. You need to move your lips and you need to get the right form with your tongue. So it's an important thing to actually provide the opportunity for students to do so. Perhaps we were fortunate that we were maybe a little bit ahead of the curve of understanding where the pandemic was at. And when I say a little bit ahead, maybe 5 days, but at that time, everything was moving so fast. You were quite a bit ahead by doing so. And obviously, working with large organizations, you start to get little clues from them as well of what possibly could be happening. And I know we started talking about the pandemic in mid-February with the administration team about, what would we do if things happened that were happening in Europe? How would we approach things? What would we do? And so the night that the NBA canceled their basketball season was obviously a very big news story of there's something definitely happening here. And so we were quick to be on the phone with our clients talking about our capacity to deliver online training so that when, those kind of crisis meetings were occurring throughout the week in March, they had an answer. Our HR contacts knew that we had the capacity to deliver online training. We were ready to go. And so they could give a response. And so fortunately, many clients decided to go, yeah, let's go online. And we worked really hard. And that's really a hats off to the learning and development team and really everyone at ACA who worked over the weekend and put in a lot of hours to bring up to speed teachers who maybe hadn't taught online previously, to train them on the platforms, to get them some of the particulars about training online. And so we did a really good job of bringing in a lot of people to transition smoothly, where over the course of a weekend, if people had a class on Monday, they still had that class on Monday and Tuesday and so on. Some organizations decided to take the 2-week pause that was initially promised at the start, but once they realized it was possibly going to be longer than that, moved back to online training. And so that's been a positive. It'll probably stay. Online training was becoming more and more of an issue for a lot of organizations, really as a result of a lack of real estate and a lack of space to give training on an ongoing basis. So training rooms were becoming to be limited. And so online training was already taking on a little bit more of a space, but obviously that's been accelerated within our industry and within many industries of online work.
Mhm. And I think too, our students have responded very well. I mean, I know that even before the pandemic, we were offering about 25% of our training already online. But a lot of my students who had training before and after, just on a personal level, have told me they really like the features of online training. We're still face to face. We can still see and talk to each other as we always have. We have the meeting chat, which we can use sort of as a virtual whiteboard if we need to note things down. We have various ways of presenting materials, sharing videos, sharing PowerPoint or presentations, and working interactively together with them. So I would say that generally, my students and many of the students of the other instructors I've spoken to have responded really positively to the change.
Absolutely. And one of the benefits is now as a teacher or as the instructor, we control the environment. Whereas when we went to a room and you got room number R394, sometimes in the belly of the building, there maybe wasn't a there wasn't a board. There maybe was a flip chart, but the markers didn't work. Perhaps when you arrived, the room was being used by another party. So you had a little bit more of that variety and variables within your teaching environment, where online, yeah, you can provide feedback in real time. You have visuals that you can use. You can also record documents. You can save notes really easily and then provide them to your students. So online for language learning is a really good substitute for in-person training.
I have to laugh a little bit because as you were talking about the variables that we couldn't control, I remember one class where I arrived at the client's office. There was a ukulele practice, a lunchtime ukulele practice in progress, and in preparation for a ukulele concert at that particular employer. It was a little bit of a memorable moment. Of course, we don't have these issues in our own classrooms in Quebec City. While we're talking about teaching, earlier we talked a little bit about your experience as a teacher, but something I think that's a little bit unique about our organization is the fact that almost all of the members of our administrative team have teaching experience too. How do you think this affects how ACA does business?
I think it definitely puts our training and our instruction at the heart of what we do. It's a big part of our mission. So when we look at everything from our course plans, our pricing, the structures, the support, we're always coming from a place of how does this have an impact on the training and on the classroom experience for our learners. And so I think that allows us to provide a really learner focused training program. It also allows within the administration team to provide a lot of support to our instructors because we have that experience. We know how to balance out sometimes the logistics and billing and all the other things that come with language learning when you're providing language training to organizations, but we still are always keeping in mind what's the impact on this on our instructors and ultimately on our learners and our clients and their experience. So I think that really helps keep that focus of why are we doing this? We're all passionate about language learning. We're not in this because we saw a business opportunity per se. It's really comes from a place of passion of wanting to help people learn a second language, as many of us have also learned a second language.
And I mean, we mentioned earlier the books that have been created, the fact that there's a library of resources as well in Quebec City for instructors when we are able to give in-person classes. We've got also projects like the most recent set of lesson plans, which were rolled out for instructors to sort of have a skeleton, a basis for their lessons that they can build and expand and customize. And our online platform, Mindy. I mean, this is such a great website because it gives students a chance to see practice in different contexts, do interactive activities of various kinds, watch short videos, and build skills in a really complementary way. And I think that that's something, it's really the depth of curriculum that in my career, having taught in many different programs, that really sets us apart.
There are lots of online and different apps for people. I mean, Duolingo is a very common one. There's Babbel. Our goal around Mindy was to provide learners from an intermediate to advanced spot to really to grow more, because most of the language learning applications on the market right now are really geared towards beginner, like very, very much a beginner, to maybe an elementary, maybe start of intermediate level. And there's reasons why, because it's easy to show progression early on. It's also easy to demonstrate. It's really easy to do research around someone who has no level of which methods work the best to take them to a small improvement. But for Mindy, it was really about how do we provide our intermediate and advanced learners with opportunities to improve. And so, yeah, that's been a really great tool, again, for the learners who like to do it, who like to spend the time outside of the classroom. And even a project like Les Bons Mots has been a great way to get, another opportunity for our learners to learn, and also for our instructors to share and collaborate. Because as teachers, you're often in a silo where you work with your learners and your students, but you don't always get that opportunity to collaborate. And so it's been also a great way for our staff to continue to collaborate, especially during the pandemic, where we could not hold in-person training. We couldn't get together for a social event. The only way we could do it really was through work and through collaboration. And so that's been a really positive effect of the pandemic on our organization, is that ability to bring in people from Montreal, from Toronto, from Ottawa, from Quebec. Essentially, the physical distances have been erased because of the pandemic. We're all at home, so we're all at kind of the same spot.
So we've talked about some of the curriculum, the learning materials that ACA provides to help our learners who are business people who need to communicate effectively in their individual contexts. How else do we support the needs of our community of business language learners?
Well, also, we do have our course books, which are very much set up to do language skill, business skill. And it's very much set up that way on purpose, so that sometimes it's also to convince our learners of the importance of learning sometimes the linguistic skills that they need, because there will be sometimes resistance of, why do I need to learn this? What is the purpose of this? Well, the purpose of it is so that you can actually perform this business skill, whether it's providing feedback, perhaps it's managing your team, perhaps it's presenting your product or your service. This is why it's important. And then we can also, within our course books, we highlight a lot of the differences between French and English. So we have written many of our course books, and the majority of our content is with a Francophone learner in mind. So what are some of the challenges that they may have, whether it's false friends or things that they hear in pop culture that are fine when we're sitting around the kitchen table or around the supper table, but maybe in a professional context are not appropriate. So we try and highlight those. On our French side, we really try and provide Canadian French. So French Canadian expressions, some of the things that are going to be important to a learner in Toronto, so that we don't necessarily learn Parisian French that when they come to Quebec, no one says. And I know myself, when I was learning French and I moved here, even the French I had, wasn't used because it wasn't Canadian French. And so that's also part of the way that we do that. We also provide, and that was another thing through the pandemic, we quickly developed, and hats off to you, Britta, for doing that so quickly, specific skills within a second language, whether we were looking at having difficult conversations, writing effective emails, and then developing some of those soft skills in your second language, which I think is really appreciated by our clients, of how do I put some of this in practice? So we're not always just speaking about what you do on the weekend and small chat, but really digging into those things. And you need the content to do that, Because if you don't have the content, it doesn't necessarily just come up in natural conversation. Let's talk about presenting a spreadsheet, or let's talk about a financial statement. Those aren't necessarily activities that just come up naturally. You need the content and the structure to have that work situation and to have those role plays. And so that's what's been a big part of our content development, is to provide the context in which our clients and our participants can practice their business language skills.
I think you're right, Taylor. The webinars that targeted specific skills were well received during the early days of the pandemic, and I really enjoyed developing them. We talked also about bilingualism and the need for people in different positions to have different degrees of bilingualism. And at ACA, we work with human resources departments on that to help them sort of understand the needs, don't we?
Yeah, so we work with several of our clients to look at, if you have a position, what's the language skill set required, just as they would look at what accreditation does one need, what education does one need, how many years of experience does one require to perform this function. Well, there's also a linguistic skill set that one would require to perform their job function. So we can help defining what those are, depending on how important it is, how frequent it is, and then what the tasks are at hand, to kind of get an idea. Well, someone requires this level. And then we also provide linguistic evaluations with detailed reports so that they have that information on hand, just as they might do a psychometric test or a skills test. They can also do a linguistic test and get a report from us. So it's also another area in which we can provide assistance. And sometimes it is also looking at a person, if they go, well, we want to see what kind of timeline do we have with this candidate versus another candidate. If the linguistic skill set is really high and someone is a beginner, it may not be in the organization's interest to invest a significant amount of time and financial resources into that candidate, because the timeline for them to reach their goals, because just the nature of language acquisition, it could be 2 to 3 years out, which you may not retain that employee for that amount of time.
Yeah, it helps businesses to make more strategic decisions if they have an accurate picture of the position's needs and how well the candidate is fitting in to that expectation.
Correct.
We've spoken quite a bit about ESL. FSL is another big part of and growing part of our company. What other languages do we offer?
We have German classes taking place, Spanish classes taking place. We have Korean classes taking place. We do have the capacity to put in place language learning for any language. Do all of our languages have the same level of support as, say, English and French in terms of content? No, but we are able to put in place really good language training for other language training programs, and find the resources necessary to ensure that our clients, and we do have clients who are taking several languages just due to the nature of their organization or business, that they still get that ACA experience.
We're here at the start of a new year, 2021. What do you think is next for our industry and for ACA?
Well, I would say with the industry, obviously online will continue through 2021, probably well into 2022. Online training will stay in place. It'll remain a very big part of training. When a vaccine does come and people start returning to the office, in terms of how much training we do in person will determine on organizations' decisions around teletravail or work from home, remote work, because to deliver language training, it's not just one day, Thursday from 9 till 4, that you do your language training class and everyone can come into the office that day. It's every Thursday from 11 till 1 over 15 weeks. So you need all of those people in the office at the same time, at the same location. So I would say that online training will take place well into the future. Many people, as you mentioned earlier, have experienced it for the first time. Maybe beforehand had resistance to it because, it'll be boring, it won't be as interactive. I don't want to do online training, I want to do in person. Have now experienced it and had a very positive experience with it. And they don't have to get in their car to go to a class. They also don't even have to, even if they're in their own building, they don't have to jump in the elevator, go down, go through the security to maybe another building to get into their class. It still would take them 15, 20 minutes sometimes out of their day. They can just click and away they go with their class, and they go back to that. So I would continue to see that. I think more languages will take place. Obviously, as we move online, that provides a lot more opportunity for us, but it also makes it even more critical that we continue to develop our tools, continue to develop our customer experience, continue to provide our instructors with the support that they require, because now there are no barriers. So people do also have, it's not necessarily because we're in Quebec City that they'll choose to go with us. It's online, so now anything is possible. But that also, as much as that includes anything is possible for ACA, it also means anything is possible for our clientele. And so we need to continue to provide a world-class experience because we will be competing on a worldwide level.
Absolutely. There's a lot of opportunity for us to grow and also a lot of opportunity for us to compete on the worldwide stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've done that. I mean, we're working with world-class organizations already in Quebec, in Canada. We're providing language instruction to nearly 2,000 people every week. And so, and we're delivering world-class experiences because we know our clients are also part of that mix. And they had opportunities to work with other great organizations within Canada. They've selected to work with us. We're grateful for that. They've remained clients for many years, and our clients are, for the most part, we'll have, like I said, 2,000 people. Basically, 1,995 of them are going to say it was a great experience. We definitely still always work to how do we get those other five to say, yes, that was too. You can't be everything to everyone, but we definitely try and provide as many opportunities for our clients to have a good experience.
Every week, we like to offer a recommendation of something connected to language learning or a way that our language learners can practice. What would you like to recommend, Taylor, that our learners check out this week?
I would recommend that they first and foremost find anything that they're really interested in. It all depends on your level. If you're more of a beginner level, watch a TV show or a movie you've already seen, maybe in French, watch it in English again. I think that's a great way. So you don't have to worry about following the story, because if it's in our own language, there are often times we're saying maybe to the person sitting beside on the couch, what just happened? What's going on? And we have a tendency as we're watching it in our second language to assume it's because we don't understand. Sometimes the stories are complicated and there's lots of webs. And so I think it's important that people, if they're more of a beginner, early intermediate level, watch something that you've already seen, that you understand. As we move into our higher intermediate and for business people, I would recommend websites like Business Insider, which have lots of just common small articles around what businesses are doing, what people are doing. Inc.com is also another place just to get some experience or articles around what's going on in corporations, whether it's different trends. So I'd recommend that. If you're looking for Canadian news, I would recommend watching The National from CBC. The CBC has a lot of great content that provides really a Canadian and a professional level of English, just as Radio Canada does in French.
I have to tell you, it is going to be shouting out the CBC, a CBC Appreciation Week here at Les Bons Mots, because I am also recommending something from the CBC. I'd like to recommend that our listeners check out a series produced by CBC called Kim's Convenience. Have you seen this series before, Taylor?
I've seen a few of the shows. I'm just started another CBC show, Schitt's Creek, as well, starting that. I'll be planning over my Christmas holidays to maybe binge that.
Oh, exciting. Well, Kim's Convenience, I like it because it's a short comedy series. So you're really only investing 22 minutes out of your day. And the characters are quite charming. The setting is a convenience store in Toronto and a Korean Canadian family who operate it. And so you've got kind of the element of intergenerational conflict between the immigrant parents and their expectations and the children who were born in Canada. It's primarily a comedy. It's not a series that's a heavy conflict series. It's just very enjoyable cast, great writing, and it makes it a lot of fun. And I think Schitt's Creek probably has quite a few of those elements as well.
Well, it's always, I think, important to remember that there is a Canadian culture, and I think we can sometimes get overrun by just the amount of content that's out there that maybe comes from south of the border. But it's important to remember that there's still a lot of great things being produced here in Canada that are worth checking out.
Yeah, and Canadian content is a great way to hear Canadian accents, hear Canadianisms. We talked
Mhm.
about the bunny hug. I think Taylor, you'll be very familiar with that one.
Yeah, I'm from Saskatchewan, so it's all about a bunny hug.
I think you might be wearing a bunny hug right now.
I am actually wearing a bunny hug right now.
Yeah, so when we get to engage a little bit with material that's produced here, much like our own material at ACA being for our context, we can enjoy that in our popular culture as well. Taylor, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here on Les Bons Mots. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me, Britta, and thank you for doing a great job with this. I hope you're enjoying it, and I know I'm a really big fan of what everyone on Les Bons Mots has been doing.
Oh, well, I really appreciate having the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of this week's episode of Les Bons Mots. You can visit us on our website at lesbonsmots.ca. You can find there a lot of great content that we have on our blog where we post regularly about news, culture, and language learning. You can check out Lauren's videos on language learning as well and past episodes of Les Bons Mots. Do you have any questions or suggestions? We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at lesbonsmots@lesateliers.ca or find us on Facebook and Instagram at lesateliers.ca. Reach out to us if you're interested in learning more about our language training programs or if you want to talk to us about ways you can improve your skills. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts to help other language learners find us. Thanks again, and happy practicing.